Hi, I'm Broma,
And I'm Radhika.
and together.
We're Promrad.
Before we get into today's episode, please remember to like, follow, comment, subscribe, all the things or some of the things on whichever platform where you get your podcasts. And if you have questions in general about our work, our careers, the titles we're talking about, or the guests that we have on here, please send those to us at promradproductions@gmail.com or via DM anywhere except like Facebook. I think we might even be on Facebook,
I think we are on Facebook.
but please don't contact us there. It just will make me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can't say that we know how to log into that account anymore. So today we are really excited to be joined by Roshan Sethi. He's a writer, director, and a practicing radiation oncologist, literally currently in Boston, about to do that job. He is also the co-creator of The Resident on Fox, and his directorial debut, 7 Days, which we both loved, won the Independent Spirit Award for Best First Feature. He also directed one of our favorite films of last year, A Nice Indian Boy. We chatted about it in our favorites of 2025 episode, so go check that out. And today we're here to talk about his debut novel, The Simp. Oh yeah, The Simp, which will be out on July 7th. It's set in Hollywood and it follows Raj Ladlani, a struggling actor who tricks his way into an assistant job for an A-list and well-connected writer-director couple. But the close proximity to power eventually causes Raj to lean into his worst instincts, especially after he learns about a secret project that one of his bosses is working on. So thank you so much for being here, Roshan. We're really excited to talk to you. I think my first question is like, how do you have the time?
Well,
How dare you?
I have more time than people think I do, I think, because I write really quickly and somewhat recklessly and almost thoughtlessly for usually only 2 to 3 hours a day. And then the rest of the day, I'm not writing. I don't have the patience because I'm so kind of frenetic as a person. So writing is not like a time-consuming job that prohibits me from other careers. And then the hospital work or the medical work, I only do part-time for only 8 to 9 weeks of the year. So when I'm on in the hospital, I generally can't write, but when I'm not, I have more time than people think.
Wait, that's so interesting because I feel like every other writer I talk to, present company included, is a huge part of the process is the motivation to do it. Like I spend probably 12 to 15 hours a day being like, well, I'm gonna do some writing later. Can't wait to write.
Like hyping yourself up to write.
Yeah.
Mentally prepare, and then like so little of it is actually doing that. And then I'll write like I wrote half a page today, and I was like, wow, what a day.
Yeah, I think because I come from medicine, basically when I first started writing, I was in the hospital in residency, and as a result, I could only write in the morning before rounds from like 5 to 7 a.m. So I developed this writing habit that's still with me, which is I can only write for 2 hours in the morning, and I wrote then and I write now at a blistering pace because I just did not have the time in those days. I was working 70 to 80 hours a week, so I always wrote 10 pages a day. So 2 hours 10 pages. And that's the true of every single day of my life. I wrote this morning 2 hours and 10 pages. I always do that. Even if I don't have a deadline or even if I don't have a reason to be writing something. I just do that every single day. So it's like so a part of my routine.
Is your process like in those 2 hours, you're just writing whatever comes to you, or are you
Yeah, it's totally
brainstorming, or
free.
like, okay.
No, it's just total free writing. And I write without judgment of myself because the hardest thing about writing, obviously, is you're consumed by self-loathing and self-hatred and humiliation almost. Like it's a deep sense of
Constantly.
shame when you write. Like, how dare you? Write and write something so bad. But the key I found, for me at least, is to write as if that's not happening. So it is happening. I hear it and I feel it, but I ignore it completely for those 2 hours and I just write in an almost delusional state of mind. And
Oh.
then sometimes what I write is very good and sometimes what I write is really, really bad. So the voice is not always wrong, but you're much more able to soberly evaluate something when you're not in the middle of doing it.
Yeah, I think I always self-edit myself in those moments, and that's cardinal sin number one when you're writing is to just let it all out, and I cannot get out of my own way sometimes.
Well, sometimes people who have that issue, because it's so common, is that what I recommend, and this may not work for you, or maybe you've already tried it, is to separate the generative and the self-censorious parts of your writing brain. So write in the morning in a purely generative, non-judgmental way, and then return and be in a purely judgmental zone. It's not that you're not going to be self-editing and judgmental, it's that you've separated it into different parts of the day. I've seen that work for some people, but it's just a tough thing. It's like it's so easy to hate yourself.
Um, I have a question, which is how often do other Indian American artists come to you and they're like, you're making us look bad because you are doing arts and medicine? Because I'm also thinking of that, and now I'm just based on like, your previous answer, I'm like, my mom is gonna listen to this podcast and be like, well, why don't you write for 2 hours every morning? Like, it's
Yeah.
even within this community.
Tell your mom I'm gay. She'll feel a lot better. Basically, I'm so
Because you have a partner, she'll be like, well,
yeah. Basically, like, that degree of ambition and industry is all very related to me having been closeted for so long. Like, it's not normal to want these many careers, and it's all just kind of an almost hopeless attempt to have a feeling of self-worth. I'm just constantly generating activities to feel better about myself. But it's coming in a weird way from kind of a dark, sad place. It's not because I'm just so smart. It's because I'm so driven to prove something to myself. Still, even after having come out, even after having found like a happy relationship, that drive never goes away.
I
It's
was about to ask, like, you still feel that way? That's really
every
interesting
day.
that, like, it doesn't leave you even after kind of
No.
crossing the bridge of what was causing it in the first place.
No, I'm constantly battling feelings of failure. It's crazy. It's just nonstop. It doesn't get better with anything working out. It just gets worse. And I have all these crazy habits. I read every letterbox review for Nice Indian Boy, for example. And there's 54,000 reviews now, coming up on 55,000. And I've read them all, but I skim them if they're positive, and I read every word if they're negative.
oh, Roshan,
Because I'm
no.
just looking, I guess.
It's relatable, unfortunately.
And every time, then I look at what their top fours are, and then I'm like, they're right. Like they have really good taste.
Oh,
It's
can I
like,
give you some advice, which is to
no,
flip those habits around? Maybe read every word of the positive ones.
no, I really need to, because yeah. But all this to say that what looks on the surface like an extraordinary drive and a lot of achievement is just evidence of being crazy. Um, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless. I like being busy, but I don't think anyone should have 3 or 4 careers if they're truly self-contented. I don't think a self-contented person would.
I want to just jump into the novel and even just to the end, to the acknowledgments, where you jokingly, I think, mention that you ripped off your partner Karan Soni's life story for this novel. What were some of the conversations that you guys had, just knowing that he kind of did have the uphill battle of being an Indian actor from India who was breaking into Hollywood and all of the hurdles that come along with that?
Yeah, we both entered the industry around the same time. He a little bit earlier than me, so we both went through when Hollywood was really bad, and the only way you could work as an Indian American actor was as a terrorist. And all of those stories that are in the book are just the things that literally happened to him. But the chapter that summarizes his background is basically half real. It's what he came from, and then half not real. It's what would have happened to him if he had not been successful. The whole book, in a way, is what would have happened to him if he had not been successful. And I've combined his personality with mine because I'm much more ruthless and scheming than he ever is. But I've taken a lot of what he went through. We never had really conversations about it. He just is constantly telling these stories that are in the book. And every time he embarks on them again, I feel like, oh my God, here we go again. Because I've heard these stories so many times. And then I just turned around and wrote them down verbatim in the book without even thinking about it. It's like I knew every beat of them.
How
Um,
did he feel about that being
he just
like
thought it
the
was
fodder?
he just doesn't he's just not the kind of person who would ever care about that. He just thinks it's really like another he's in general his attitude towards me is he's just bemused by me, like because I'm so different from him. He's very calm and even keeled, and I'm just like this kind of frenetic crazy presence around him, so he just thought it was really funny, and he liked the book.
That makes three, four of us. I guess I'm
Yeah.
including you in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're such an accomplished writer and director, so why did you choose a novel for the format of this story?
I had just made A Nice Indian Boy, and it had just premiered at South by, and this was in 2024. It did not sell to any distributor. It went through a really, really rough road to distribution, despite its quality, despite rave reviews, despite the reaction to it. And every day I was just getting an email from a different major distributor and studio saying that the people in the movie aren't meaningful, which was coded in so many ways. Not only not meaningful, but not likely to draw audiences, not likely to engage people in a significant way. So we were suddenly like desperately panning for someone to buy this movie that had been made with so much love and I thought talent and industry and ability. And that feeling filled me with anger. So I started doing two things. One was just writing kind of crazy posts on Instagram, which I've continued doing now for 2 years. And then the second was I wrote this book in 3 weeks, and it was a desire to make that anger into a story. Like it's because you can't those Instagram posts. Where are they going? Like everyone can read them and feel something so briefly or flickeringly, but a book can make you feel it more in your marrow. So that was what it all came out with. The other thing that was happening was I was reading Vanity Fair, which I'd never read before, the 19th century novel by Thackeray, and it just was sitting at Skylight Books, and it was a huge book, and I started reading it, and I loved the tone and the style. So every day I read 30 pages of that book, and I wrote 2,000 to 3,000 words of this book, and then just went back and forth between them. So those are all the things that were swirling.
The distribution angle is really interesting because I feel like publishing would have the same hurdles. Did you run into anything like that with the book
No,
release?
publishing was seamless because it just there's you don't wear identity in the same way in publishing. You just don't because a movie is people that you're looking at in the poster in the movie, and a book is different. There's removed from it and who's in it. And I think there are still many issues with race in publishing that many more qualified people can talk on, but for me, the entire experience was seamless because I wrote that book in 3 weeks and then revised it for maybe another week after I received notes from my agent. And then the entire process at Simon & Schuster with everybody was just to protect and preserve. It was better than any experience in Hollywood, honestly, on the writing side and the development side.
Radhika mentioned that this novel reminded her of Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which I don't know if you've read, but it's very much about like white people capitalizing on the stories of people of color.
Yeah, I've heard it's amazing. I haven't read it somehow.
It's like a psychological thriller, I would say.
Yeah, it's really good. It really reminded me of this, and they're both really quick reads, but they're both really contending with race in the arts. So I thought it was a really good comp book.
And then I also wanted to bring up Vanity Fair, which you mentioned, and kind of that thematic connection, because pretty early on in The Simp, it is introduced that that is like Raj's favorite novel, and that he goes back to it continuously, that it has kind of planted this idea in his head of the fair, of arriving at a mystical destination that may or may not exist, and so much of this is him kind of trying to reach there. But I would love to hear you kind of unpack that connection as much as it is explicitly in the novel, but just like how that kind of took root for you and how you executed it.
Yeah, well, when I started reading the book completely by coincidence, the idea of Vanity Fair being a place full of both like showiness and glamour and hypocrisy was obviously immediately resonant with what I was then experiencing in Hollywood and honestly have experienced the entire time that I've been there. So that was the immediate and direct parallel. Interestingly, Vanity Fair is based on another book, or it's a parody in some ways, or a satire of another book, Pilgrim's Progress, which was a Christian morality tale, basically. And in one of the small episodes of the many episodes that comprise that book, there's a town called Vanity Fair, which is just like full of vain people, I guess. It's a fair of vanities. And the book was basically referencing that. So my book became a book referencing a book referencing a book. And it all began with a Christian morality tale and became something much more sour with Vanity Fair, the book, and even more sour with what I was writing. So I only almost exclusively read 19th century fiction. And the reason I do is because I think it's better a little bit than contemporary fiction because it's more narrative, and I like narrative. I like a really robust sense of story. And for me, my hot take on literature is that everything after Joyce kind of became vibes. And I just don't like vibes. I know people love vibes, but I feel like he made it nonsense. And then it's just been really beautiful sentences, but not a lot of story since then, with a few exceptions. I think the exceptions are like Junot Diaz and Sally Rooney, but pretty much everyone else I think is guilty of it. But before that, you had this like amazing era, the peak novel, where it was just amazing sense of narrative and structure and amazing prose and description and feeling. Vanity Fair was for me at least approximately in that era of the peak novel. But that's partly why I read 19th century novels. The other reason is that they are full of people who are repressed. And the Victorian society was so, and the Vanity Fair is technically not set in Victorian society, but many of the books I read are, and that it was so repressed and so rigid in a way that honestly just reminds me of growing up. I think Indians, like at least my version of it, was very Victorian.
I was laughing because we recorded an episode about the new Lord of the Flies show
Oh yeah,
where we discussed how we don't really relate to stuff from the 19th century, or we like prefer.
I think I name checked 19th century specifically. I was
oh
like,
my
That's
god,
why we were laughing at that.
that's so
oh, wait.
good. Isn't Lord of the Flies? When was Lord of the Flies written? What?
1954, I believe.
Oh, so that's technically 20th century, but
20th, yeah.
I haven't read the book. But that
You might
should
not like it.
yeah, because see 1954, that's the era of nonsense. That's totally the era. That's post Joyce, so that's post. You know,
We are on opposite ends on that one.
it's so
Wow.
specific because he turned it into nonsense. Because it was all making sense, and he wrote one of the greatest works of creative fiction, The Dubliners. Then he started writing Ulysses. Have you ever read Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake? I mean, those two are just, I don't care who says that they are literature or full of meaning. It's just utter nonsense. It's just word association, word salad, like aphasia writing. And then ever since then, we've been in stream of consciousness and atmosphere. Everything's got atmosphere and prose, and everything must be described in such pungent detail in ways that are not pushing the story forward at all. If you go back and you read Austen, he's probably the master of the form. Nothing is described. You don't know what anyone looks like. You know the income of every single man in those books. You know how much his estate makes per month, but you don't know what a single person looks like or what a building looks like. Nothing is described. But after Flaubert and Joyce, we entered the nonsense era. Even my book belongs to that nonsense.
I was going to say, you describe what Raj looked like very specifically.
Because people don't let you not describe it now. And if I had my druthers, I'd just be writing like our girl Austin. She had it figured out.
So, speaking of Raj, I really want to get into how you characterized him. He's desperate and self loathing and a compulsive liar. There's honestly very few redeeming qualities for him. And I'm curious, like, how you figure out the details that you need to include in order to still make him someone worth being at the center of the story. And, like, do you even consider him an empathetic character? Just knowing that the book's subtitle is A Novel Without a Hero, like, do you think of him in those terms?
Yeah, well, Vanity Fair's subtitle is A Novel Without a Hero.
Yeah.
So it's dealing with a similar issue. My big fear is writing something that is about what it's like to experience racism in Hollywood, where the lead character, who is the victim of that racism, is in every way sympathetic person. Because what you end up doing is writing a straw horse tale of victimhood, which is so much of where you're making a point that doesn't feel real because the person feels almost too good. They're simply enduring things. And I refer to this in the book, but there's a kind of excess of tenderness and caution that's extended towards minority characters who must be very good martyrs, especially when they are the victims of the various things they've been victims of in history. So I was writing with such a reaction to that, of wanting to give him every unsympathetic quality, but still nonetheless be a victim of racism. It's not that we deserve to be on television or involved in television because we are better people or because we are good people even. I think there are like lots of bad Indians and there's lots of bad everything. It's more that equity is just a basic principle that makes every industry better. So those were all the points I was trying to make. I actually, when I wrote him, found him very sympathetic. It's only since sharing it with other people that I found he's not always received that way. But it may be because I share many of his qualities: the desperation, the self-loathing, and then the scheming. Those are all qualities that I am guilty of at various times. But the simpering part of him, the ingratiating part of him, is something I'm never guilty of. I'm extremely the opposite of that. That's a quality that I found funny, which is why I put it.
It is very fun to be in his head while he is making decisions that I probably would not make, having thoughts that I maybe wouldn't have, and seeing him act on that. Like, he's a very interesting anti-hero, like, to lead the novel. And I think so much of like what I loved about this book and why I devoured it was like just being in Raj's head and hearing his inner monologue. So he's engaging for sure.
I'm glad to hear that. It's interesting because I think this is happening to us on a macro level too. I was talking to someone who's involved in one of the South Asian advocacy organizations in Hollywood, and he was saying that one of the things that we need to put an end to is the jealousy and competition that forms between South Asians who are, the victims of a scarcity mindset. And he was particularly upset at someone having confessed how jealous they felt of another Indian booking something. And my personal POV on that is that's another example of us needing to be so saintly and such martyrs. And there's actually nothing wrong with having an ugly emotion that is not your fault. It's not our fault that we're in a scarcity position. And I have, at various times in my career, been consumed by jealousy of the accomplishments of other South Asians. That is happening to me very often, especially when I read Deadline. And just as quickly convince myself out of them. And a huge part of me just wants success for the whole community. But to act like we're not human and we're just representatives of a social justice initiative that we're somehow a part of, is, I think, part of the problem in a weird way.
One of my favorite parts of this book early on is when it's in Raj's flashback where he goes to this panel about South Asian representation in Hollywood, which I'm sure we've all been to many of
Yeah.
these panels if, or probably spoken on them at this point. And there's this underlying question that then gets introduced about performing your ethnicity for the white audience. And we see how that gets in Raj's head. But it's an interesting balance, I think, for artists of color to both claim our identity and protect it while choosing to share it with everyone from executives to audiences. So do we have that balance? Have we found it? Does it exist? And like, what would the sweet spot look like for you?
No, we definitely have not found the balance, and it's a trap because if you are invited to perform your ethnicity and you do, then you condemn your career because then you are now the diversity thing, and that is so not in vogue at the moment in Hollywood. So it's an extremely tricky thing. They honestly don't, they, meaning the structure of the industry, don't believe you are capable of much more than representing your identity. They fundamentally believe that is what you are here to do. Why else would an Indian wander into Hollywood other than to give voice to their personal experiences? That's an interesting thing to stop and examine to see if that's really true, if that is all we're capable of, or why that would be on us. That's why people are so critical of M. Night, but I'm like, I don't think he had anything to say about being Indian, so he didn't say it. The thing I'm critical of him about is just casting exclusively white people, and the reason for that is so fascinating, which he gets into. He's said it many times, including on the couch in a Graham Norton show. His first movie that he ever made was an all-Indian cast, and it didn't sell. It went nowhere. It was greeted with complete cold indifference in the 90s, and he vowed from that point forward to listen to what his father told him, which is don't cast anyone who's not white. And he's done that ever since. He's been so burned by whatever he experienced in the 90s that he's never released a movie with a minority lead, other than Samuel Jackson, I guess you can argue, but he's by and large released white-led movies, all because of him basically dodging the trap of performing his identity, not making the all-Indian thing, making something that is so avowedly different from that, and then dealing with it. So I think you can see it in the examples of many people's careers.
That's so fascinating. And it's interesting, especially because now I feel like performing or being Indian is so in vogue, or like really leaning into your cultural identity is celebrated more, but celebrated in like a financial way more than actual cultural identity. I'm curious what you feel about the word representation in general. It just gets thrown around so much.
It's a fascinating word, and it means a lot to a lot of people. I think my biggest issue with it, which I've said elsewhere and I'll say again, is it just implies that the only purpose of our art is to represent us, and that's not the purpose of our art. It's just all part of this air of social justice and politeness that has invaded the question of whether or not minorities should be in TV and film. And the real question is, do we have equitable access? If you're an extremely talented actor, if you're an extremely talented writer, would you have the same fortunes as someone who wasn't white, or vice versa? Would Barry Keoghan, in other words, have his career if he was Indian? Would he have booked any of those roles? Would he have received critical acclaim? Would he have risen to the heights that he has? You can do that exercise with anyone, including Timothée Chalamet, which the book does explicitly. That's the real question. Is there equity? Because there should be equity. We all believe in equity. We all believe that your race should not interfere with the opportunities that you're afforded. The question of representation is actually just a completely different question. That's, are we adequately visible, which is an important thing. It certainly matters, but those are distinct subjects.
In the representation conversation, something that comes up a lot is just like the way that the stories are told and being genuine and authentic to the stories. And I think in that, so many of our Desi American and first gen stories center around generational misunderstandings or living up to your parents' expectations. And this book kind of does away with that completely, and I really appreciated that. Was that something that you were consciously thinking of when you were writing it?
No, I actually have no problems with any of those stereotypes, and I think as long as you're writing something that feels true to you and is true, then it's fine. I've made 2 movies about generational misunderstandings in love, and that's very true to my experience as a millennial South Asian. And the criticism of the excess of those kinds of stereotypes in art is, to me, a little silly, because my whole life is a walking stereotype. I was literally forced to go to medical school. I had very strict parents. All of the things that you imagine from that form of art were just quite literally true of my life. But in the book, I was in it came out of a very specific and kind of embittered emotion that I was feeling. It was just, I was not thinking about love or romance or family or anything remotely positive. I was just thinking about how this industry got to this place and all the things we can say and not say about it. And I was feeling really stifled by to what extent I could express that. I've come a long way since, and now I'll say literally anything to anyone, as you guys know. But at the time, it just felt like we were just meant to passively endure what was clearly racism.
Speaking of your self-expression, anyone who follows you on Instagram is familiar with your hot takes section, which are mostly just facts, I think, about the current state of the industry and like what Hollywood is trying to shape, how it's trying to shape its image. But I would love to just have you speak on it.
Yeah, I write hot takes on Instagram. I post them on my stories with very little thought as to the implications. Then I tuck them into a highlight called hot takes. One, two, three, four, and five now. And then I never think about them again. And I receive some crazy replies sometimes. As I've done them, more and more people have started watching them, and fairly significant figures in the industry have started to watch them who do not follow me. So they're being sent to people who I should probably be exercising much more caution with. But for some reason, I've just gotten wilder and wilder. But basically, what I'm saying in them is just the same thing over and over again. I'm actually quite deliberately repetitive, which is one, that the audience for most entertainment in the theatrical box office in America is largely minorities. So it's 70%, sometimes 70% plus Black, Latinx, and Asian. The white box office has declined significantly to the point that it's becoming less and less of a variable even in whether or not a movie succeeds or doesn't succeed. That's domestically in America. The wisdom has always been that a movie has to work internationally exactly as much as it works domestically. So you make 50% of your income abroad in territories that are not America, and you make 50% of your income in America. Now, with America being so diverse, that means that at least half of your income is largely coming from people who are not white. And that's increasingly true abroad, too, because some of the biggest territories for theater going reflect basically the same demographics. Mexico, Brazil, Korea, China, before that changed as a variable. But the idea that we're making movies for America and white people in America and Europe are just so far gone. And yet, I don't think the infrastructure and the agents and the executives and all the people who are creating that content have caught up to that reality. So they're churning out the same heavily white-led stuff for audiences that are heavily not white. And it was interesting watching the videos of people in the theater for Michael, because that was definitely not what I think executives are imagining their movies going to. The other thing that I criticize a lot is just the anointing of random white actors as
Yes.
stars. And
Yes.
there's no proof or evidence that these actors have actually acquired a meaningful following. They're just kind of planted in these movies in ways that would never happen, for example, to Simone Ashley or to an Indian or to anyone of similar caliber who's not white. And there has been a recent, in the last 3 or 4 years, crop of just truly random white people who have become the leads of everything, for whom there is no evidence that they have a real meaningful connection to their audience. There are people for whom you feel excited to go see them in a movie. I think that's true of Zendaya, definitely. I think that's a little true of Jenna Ortega, too, although I think people find that controversial. Sydney is interesting. She's definitely got registers high on the awareness, but there is definitely a little, like, she's a unique experience, whether you like it or not. But there are very few other people among the young actors, and Timothée, who credit has to be given, has some of that as well. But there are very few other actors who are in that category who are in just as big movies. A recent example being Caleb Turner. Who is he? And who cares?
He's Dua Lipa's fiance. That's who he is.
And that
He's
has
a trophy
taken him a
husband.
very long way, because this is a completely average looking and acting person, which is totally fine. But to suddenly elevate someone into stardom with no proof of an audience that wants to see them and will go see a movie because they're in it is racism, because that's not happening to people who aren't white. My issue is not with him or with any of those actors. It's with the things that are done on their behalf.
Those takes did make me feel very sane when I was full-time doing entertainment journalism, and I was
Yeah.
like working with a lot of film critics specifically, a lot of people going to festivals where those random names were being plucked from. I wasn't seeing those films. I didn't even necessarily seek them out later, but I was in an environment editorially where day in, day out, I was being fed that like Austin Butler is the next big star or something. I
Yeah.
was like, I don't know. Should I, like, am I getting old? What is it? Am I out of touch? Honestly, seeing your analysis regularly with the box office stuff just was a really good sanity check to be like, no, there's more at play here.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because so many of these people really are very talented. Like Austin Butler is an amazing actor and
Yeah.
very handsome. the biggest theatrical success he's had is Elvis. People did not see Elvis for him. They barely knew who he was before they saw the movie. Everything that he's released since then has either been part of huge IP like Dune, which he was a small part of, or a movie that is mainly featuring him that has done financially horrible, like Caught Stealing. So we have no current evidence that Austin Butler will bring people to the box office. And I think if you did a survey that was done with the most rigorous scientific methods, I don't think you would find that he is a significant draw. Sometimes an exercise I do is I ask people in the hospital, do you know who this person is? And it's very hard to find people who know who Florence Pugh is. Austin Butler, Daisy Edgar Jones, names that are so significant and galvanizing in Hollywood are not actually known to the average person. They become known if they're in enough movies. That's the case maybe for Joseph Quinn, for example. But whether or not they have an actual following who feels they want to see them is another thing. I think stardom is ineffable and a strange quality. Like, what is it that makes Zendaya so riveting? She looks like she has a secret. She's mysterious. What is it? There's just something in the energy where you're like, I just want to go see her because she's an interesting person to look at. And the same is true of Timmy, for all my gripes with Timmy, and the same is true of many others of their ilk, but we can't automatically assume that an actor who is talented and attractive and white will produce the same effect. It doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, and they get so many more chances.
They get so many more chances. Yeah, they don't seem to suffer from their failures. It's especially true of Sydney. I feel bad for Sydney in some ways, and I don't in other ways, because I think she's received an outsized attention that is probably gendered in a lot of ways that Austin Butler will never have to deal with anything that she's had to deal with. And some of that is different for many reasons that we don't have to get into. It's never my intention to knock any of these actors because I think there really is so much talent out there. It's just, if Austin Butler was Indian, this would not be his life. I can just guarantee that. If an Indian looked exactly like Austin Butler, acted exactly like Austin Butler, that just would not be his life.
I was going to ask if you had seen Riz Ahmed's new show, Bait, because it kind of is
I
talking about
have.
this. Yeah, what were your thoughts about
Yeah,
it?
it's incredible. He's such a amazing artist. He really
Yeah,
is. Like the fact that he wrote that and acts in it, and comedy is so hard. Comedy's harder than drama, and he's so good at it. He just can do anything. I was just watching
yeah.
the Wes Anderson movie. I was like, he's really so supremely gifted. We're lucky to have him. I saw Hamlet as well, which was an interesting experiment in a lot of ways.
I had one last question, which is kind of just situating this book in Hollywood in a time where there's so much media that is doing that. We have like Hacks, The Studio, The
Mm.
Comeback, just to name a few. Where do you think The Simp fits into that larger landscape, art about the entertainment industry?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I don't think anyone in Hollywood reads. They only read books they're trying to adapt or pitch on to adapt, and even then they don't read it. They're just reading summaries of the book. So the book is definitely not for Hollywood. It's because they would be delusional of me to think that anyone in LA would read this, because it's just statistically likely not to be the case, at least at the highest levels. But the book is more just for everyone to understand what this crazy little industry is doing and how it operates and what effect that has on all of us, because Hollywood is actually very influential, even as that influence wanes. What I would say is different from the other forms of entertainment you mentioned is that they all belong to that category of sort of white LA solipsism. I Love LA, Hacks, The Studio, are people who have run out of things to write. That is their lived experience, so they are writing it. What is it to be a creative white person in LA has been thoroughly plumbed as a subject. I don't think any of us have any questions on what that experience is like because we've seen it, we've laughed at it, and none of those shows are bad. They all have their moments and have interesting things to say, but they are definitely reflecting the lived experiences of a tiny, narrow segment of the world, if that's the kind of thing you enjoy.
I will say also, we didn't get into this as much, but you, I would imagine, did not work as an assistant because you came from medicine first, right? Having worked as an assistant, there was, I don't know if triggering is the word, but stuff that maybe should have been triggering that I very much normalized. I was like, yeah, he should be available at all hours of the day and fulfill these random requests. And then well into reading the novel was like, oh, I see, that's the problem, including my acceptance of it.
I've been a medical student, which is, I think, the worst thing
I would say maybe worse, way
ever
worse.
be. But yeah, I've had many assistants. I actually was proofing this book while I was working on a film, and my assistant on the film read it, and I was like, "What is she thinking about this?" But she got bored halfway through, stopped reading it. So maybe it didn't strike a chord. But then she finished it later, and she really liked it. In the beginning, she was like, "Why should Indians act this way?" And I was like, "I don't know, but they do. I do." The thing that I've observed time and time again in Hollywood, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this, is that people in positions of power displace their anxiety on the people who are below them. And there's this sort of odd, unlimited tolerance of that displacement. And it's very easy to do even when you aren't in a position of power, as I occasionally have been. I can fully get away with displacing my anxiety by sounding irritable or being tense or being rude. That's like completely tolerated in this environment. It relies on your decency and on the decency of anyone with power at any moment. And then the lack of real parameters to these jobs is another huge issue, which you can probably talk about better than I can.
It's all predicated upon the notion that some people's time and in the book, especially their personhood and identity, is more important than other people's, which is a crazy thing to have to accept, but people often do in many industries.
Yeah, it's true. It's just how did we accept that premise?
Also, should Indians act this way is like the thesis of the book. I think it's like that's the question we're trying to get at, or at least have a commentary on.
It was a really good question. I didn't take it negatively at all. She was genuinely asking, like, is this right to portray South Asians acting this way? She was worried about the political implications of it, which I think is a fair question. But I loved working with that assistant in particular because she was much younger than me and very intelligent, more intelligent than I remember being at that age, but also very forthright in her opinions. And I actually learned so much from her. When I was that age, I just said nothing. I was just so scared. There were so many boundaries and restrictions.
Assuming they're Gen Z, which I do feel like they're better at kind of speaking their mind. But it does raise an interesting question just in general of, with having such few opportunities for our stories to be told. It's like, is this a story that we want to represent us, to use that word? But it only adds to the fabric of who we are to show like the good and the bad.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get away at some point from the onus that every South Asian work of art feels for having implications for the community. Hopefully that will go away with time, but probably not. Especially if content remains as minoritized as it does. But those questions definitely occurred to me while I was writing it, and I guess I quickly discarded them.
Well, I'm glad that we have this to add to at least the pool of representation of a character who, as you said, is very frenetic, who gets to be messy, who gets to honestly maybe strike a little fear into the heart of the reader of like what can happen if you do take someone like this for granted. And it's also just, yeah, such a riveting read. I had to stop myself from tearing through it. So thank you. Thank you for speaking with us. Where can people find you, follow you, etc. on social
See the
media?
hot takes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, my Instagram handle is Roshan.Sethi87, I think. It used to be GoatDonkey1, but I changed it because my publisher told me to. The book comes out July 7th. Go buy it because nobody's reading, so start. The back of the hardcover is just the ad that opens the book. So it's an interesting back of a book.
Oh, that's
Oh,
cool.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I really like that.
Yeah. And there's no blurbs, really. There's one on the interior fold. But other than that. There is an audiobook, yeah, and I forget the name of the actor who's reading it, but he's amazing. He's done all these big audiobooks. And I asked Kern to do it, and he said, no, that's boring. He just wouldn't do it. Also, I think apparently it's very hard. And I think maybe he meant that more than boring. Like, you have to do all the different voices and stuff. I don't listen to audiobooks
True.
but I guess you have to. There's a lot.
I guess the ones I've listened to have been memoirs, so it's not really like characters.
Hmm.
I always thought that was like optional, like your parents reading you a story. You can do voices or not, but
Yeah.
maybe it's
I don't
required.
know. But he was a hard pass from Kern. And then I was like, maybe I'll do it. And then he was like, you sound like a robot. And
Karan would have been very meta. It's a story about his life, sort of.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that-
that's what I thought. His voice is so funny. So I just thought it would be funny to hear him reading the book. But I'm going to convince him to do a little reading of the book.
Yeah.
I don't want to do any readings. I just want him to read it. So I'm going to see if he'll just read it for me.
You can get him to record a specific section, and then if he can't be there, just play the recording.
Yeah, I was thinking about getting him to read the Gold House section or something.
I laughed out loud at the name checking in this book is really great.
Yeah, there's a lot of it. Yeah, there's a lot of it.
But it, makes it specific.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and all these organizations and people and forces, they're all part of this ecosystem. So it's worth talking about all of them.
And it
Totally.
gains a lot from the specificity too. Like it just does feel more real.
Yeah, well, and cuts.
Real is in like reflecting real people, events, places, but just like more realistic and more immersive to the reader.
Yeah, especially if you know those scenes and places.
Thank you again. I'm so excited for other people to read this so we can all chat about it and just like expand this discourse because it got me thinking about a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm excited to read and talk about it.
We look forward to more hot takes, more shows, books. What medium will he attack next? Who knows?
A graphic novel, perhaps.
No, no, I'm done
Not a
with it
fan.
all. I directed a movie last year that's coming out, so.
Do you think you'll write another novel, or was this kind of
No,
scratch the itch?
not in the short term. I just have to get my anger out. So I think I got it out, except for whenever you see me post on Instagram, that means I'm angry again. Just know when you read it, like, oh no, he's angry again about race.
At least it's healthy. You're channeling it into something good.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm not channeling it to anything else.